Hey, so in this video, we're going to cover some functions or tools in the Visage MPR that I find incredibly helpful. I use them basically every study or whenever available or applicable. And these are 3D co-registration and the creation of subtraction images at the using PACS. So here we've got a study, and I'll bring it into the MPR. And do the usual correction of axes and make sure we're ready. And so how do I compare this study? Instead of link scrolling or scrolling side by side with the prior, how do I compare it using a co-registration technique? Okay, so I've got a series of prior studies that are actually off screen below, where you can see it's cut off so that I'm avoiding showing patient information. But usually when we bring something into the MPR, and you'll just you'll see part of it as I pull, I'm going to click and drag the thin images into the MPR viewer, right? With the left click of the mouse, right? And so if we want to use 3D co-registration, what I do is instead I'm going to right click and hold the right mouse key. And then holding the right mouse key, I'm going to drag and then drop using the right mouse key the study I want to compare it to. And so now I've got two overlaid images. The one on top of the other, you can kind of see that there's like two studies here. And these are actually pretty well co-registered to begin with, but if they're off set, you want to hit this button, or this is to use the automatic registration button. So I've actually set this to M using the kind of hotkey registration tool. It's Control K. So you could search for it here if you really needed. Right? Pull it over. Okay. So I've co-registered these images, and now what happens is that if I pull this bar, and you can see it on each of these panels, I pull this to the left. That's the study that I pulled over with the left click. And if I pull it to right, that's the study I pulled over with the right click. So again, just is that this kind of like the primary search, oftentimes the current pull over to the left. Oops, let me just make sure that's actually a different study. So let me just make sure I left, and then you right click and pull over the one you want to compare it to often. Okay, so those are two now overlaid, and you pull this bar, okay, left to right, and so and don't forget to co-register. Okay, so as you can see, this technique allows you to detect some subtle abnormalities between studies, and it also pairs pretty well with the use of the usual tools of increasing or decreasing the slice thickness with hotkeys, and then toggling between MIP, and average intensity. So again, that's like holding Alt and then scrolling the mouse wheel, and then Shift T for these for the toggle. Okay, so here we've got an average, and as I pull the slider back and forth, you can see that there's been an increase in size of the ventricles, and then here, particularly on the sagittals, you can see that there's new hyperdense material filling the basal cisterns. And so this is basically a case of hard to detect or a subtle subarachnoid hemorrhage that is filling the suprasellar cistern, prepontine cistern, and producing like an upstream hydrocephalus. Okay, and so this is a nice case where we're looking at comparing current and prior can help you see that. Now, the co-registration technique is honestly so useful and so powerful, in part because you can also co-register between differing modalities. So I'm going to show, here we've got the current, the one with the abnormality, and actually we can go back, and what I'm going to do is now, instead of comparing to a CT, I'm going to right click and drag over a prior MRI. You can see that these images are not well registered. You click this button. Okay, now they're registered, and if we go up here, I can drag this back and forth. Oops, let me just re-window this. Okay, and you can see that in comparison to the prior MRI, that the ventricles have gotten bigger, so that can kind of tip you off to it. And by the way, I should mention that the way that I am both changing, pulling the slider and moving up and down or scrolling through the images is by holding the up and down keys. That would be the kind of the default for moving the images or scrolling through the images. I've actually also reassigned slice scrolling to W and Q, so I actually use those keys to go between the slices. So I'm holding W and Q as I go at the same time that I scroll back and forth. There is a function to remove the overlay, or there's a way to kind of toggle back and forth. It's this tool. It's called toggle overlay. So I have currently that set to Alt O. So if I just do Alt and O, it'll do. Let's see if it does the same thing. So you can kind of also scroll back and forth. Let's see if I can do this at the same time as scrolling like this. Yeah, so you can do it that way too. I tend actually not to use that because I like the way that you can almost see the change as you pull the slider back and forth. So that's kind of a nice thing. Just for this particular case, I'll let you know, or I'll show you that. So obviously when we pull over the MRI image and overlay it, there's kind of, you got the slab issue because we have thick slices, but you can, say in this case, we can pull over we've got our sagittal flare here. Actually, let's see if we have our T1. And then, again, co-register. And so in this case, now the sagittal looks the nicest, and you can kind of compare. You can see that before there was no signal abnormalities on the T1 that corresponds with what is now new hyperdense material in the basal cistern. So that's like a nice way to notice subtle changes between studies. Let's bring up let me show you kind of the next tool that can be particularly helpful, which is the creation of subtraction images. And so actually let me bring up because I've already got images here, I'll have to replace these, and let me see if I can replace so that's, now I've added a post-contrast MR sequence. We've got the T1 and then a pre-contrast. Let me co-register these. Okay, so these are now the post and the pre pulled over with the left and the right click respectively, and these are thick section images, so these don't look as nice, but you can now see the difference using this technique between pre and post contrast. That helps you see what is actually enhancing, right? But if you want to go a step further, you can create subtraction images. So I currently have it set to U to subtract the baseline phase, and oftentimes there's a button up here, but I think it's hidden on my panel right now. So if I just press U, I get a subtraction image, and sometimes you might have to window this if it's. But here, this is very nice, especially with say MRI. You can tell the difference between inherent T1 signal and real post-contrast enhancement. So here you have the expected, nasal mucosa and musculature. And dura and vessels and choroid plexus, and then you even notice, you can see I think this is real skin enhancement rather than misregistration, but you can see all sorts of the expected things enhancing. It's really helpful especially when there's blood products close to or difficult to separate from an enhancing abnormality. That can be very helpful. Let's see, let me show you one more example where this can be really helpful. So let me just bring this back, and then if I drop now I'm bringing in a CTA. This is the head-only portion of a CTA, okay? And then I right-click, so I'm right-clicking and dragging over. Usually you want the post-contrast on the left if you're doing CTA, so let me see if I can do this again. So and just co-register. You're going to want post-contrast on the left, because it's when you press subtraction, they take the left, it takes the left and it subtracts the right. So you want the baseline or the pre-contrast on the right? So I've got here similarly, and again, this pairs well with the other tools, is that you can, you can see what enhances on a the post-contrast phase of the CTA, right? And then similarly, you can, I'm hitting W, but this is what it looks like. It looks like the subtraction, hitting W, I have to re-window a little bit, and you can get subtraction images that show just the enhancing areas. And this can be helpful in some circumstances as well. And again, this pairs well, creating dynamic MIPS to take a look at abnormality. This can make you more sensitive or allow you to detect things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to detect. So those two tools are incredibly helpful. Anytime I'm looking for a difference between a current and a prior, I'm using co-registration. I'm even looking for differences between modalities using this. And I'm showing you head imaging here because this technique tends to be particularly advantageous in neuroimaging or in head imaging because the structures don't move as much, right? It's not like we're in the chest where there's breathing, or in the abdomen where like diaphragmatic movement or bowel movement creates differences. But even in those circumstances, you can get nice co-registration, and you can use co-registration to look for subtle differences. And truthfully, when I'm evaluating the stability of lung nodules, when I'm trying to look for subtle differences in different phases of say like a GI bleeding protocol, multiphasic body imaging, I use this technique to help highlight or bring my eye towards subtle changes, and it not only does it make you more sensitive, but if you get fluent in its use, if you get really good at it, it can make you much faster, and it allows you to garner a holistic view. Sometimes I'll take like a current and a prior, and I'll just go through quickly, and let's just pretend these are current and prior. So like let's just do this and then go back. If this were oftentimes the first thing I do when I bring up a study is overlay the current and the prior, and put it into and I'll just scroll through, and this case here is a great example of where if you just had the current and you're looking side by side and you didn't have this, it may be hard to pick up this abnormality, right? You just had this and you're going fast, it could be easy to go by it. But with the co-registration technique, and you're trying to see the forest before you look at the trees, it is very powerful and makes you faster and better. Oops, what am I doing here? Okay, all right. I hope you got something out of that. If you have a system that allows you to do this, I would very much encourage you to give it a try. All right, thanks for listening.